Coming up on Mountain Hermeneutics, we're talking Catholicism. It, is it the same as Christianity? We always say Christianity, Catholicism. It is all Christianity, but is it, I mean, is it normal Christianity? Like, what does it mean to be Catholic? Isn't it the same thing? We're going to tell you about it, so keep it right here. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the divine council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck. Does everyone hate Calvinism?
Bro,
I think
Not
everybody
enough.
does.
not enough.
You gotta cut that part. That's
Why?
we're gonna get canceled. It's just that I don't want to be like Kanye or trying to grow our podcast, man. It's the opposite of what we want to do.
Remember that Mount Hermeneutics is free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. And you can find us by simply searching Mount Hermeneutics. And it's exactly spelled the way it sounds. Hermeneutics. And with that, if this is your first time with us, I am Andre. That is Matt. That's Brian. Fellas, what's happening?
What's up?
Hey boys, how you been?
That's well.
Hey Matt. Hey Dre.
Very good. It's what are we, April? We're in April now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. It's
we're
we're
well
a couple
into it.
days into the golden era after Liberation Day. Feeling liberated.
Lots of panic going on.
Yeah.
Lots of tariffs, tariffs. You actually can't get me excited about a tariff. Like
I
don't buy a
that's-
lot.
sometimes I do get a little thrill of fear thinking about it. And then I wanted to check my 401k, but then I'm like, nope, don't do it.
I mean,
Just let it happen.
First of all, never check your 401k. That's the number one rule, because it's not going to change unless you're self-managing. Like, it just is. You don't
I like
lose
to
money
look at it.
but
It's
you don't lose money until you sell, right?
I know, but it's a big number and I like to look at it.
Right, but it's going to get smaller when things like this are happening, and then it's going
That's
to get
why
bigger.
I just said that. That's why I'm not looking at it.
I'm just trying to tell everybody, stop looking at it. I remember I had a first sergeant, and this was during the IPO bubble, and he had a ton of tech stock, and he had told his wife that he was going to sell all of this at the end of the week, and they could pay their mortgage off. And they spent the week talking about what they were going to do. The bubble popped before he sold, and he had essentially nothing. But that's how crazy investments can be if you're doing quick turn things. You got to be the slow. You got to be the old cat, the old bull. If you guys remember the joke about the young bull and the old bull, it's important to always be the old bull when it comes to investing.
I don't know that joke, but
I'll tell it at the end of the show.
Okay.
anybody gonna go catch King of Kings at the theater?
King of Kings.
Yeah, Angel Studios is releasing an
I
animated Jesus flick
did not see that.
for Easter weekend.
Huh.
And it's got big names in it, like Forrest Whitaker and some other people. I don't know why Forrest Whitaker is the only name that pops out of my head right now, but there's
bunch of big names, bunch of A-listers, like Forrest
every
Whitaker.
name that's listed is that's them.
Well, that's cool. No, I didn't know about it. I haven't seen it.
They voice, yeah.
It's
King of
animated with it's Charles Dickens telling his kid the story of Jesus.
Huh.
It reminds me, there was this claymation movie that came out in the early 2000s.
Pierce Brosnan, Ben Kingsley, Mark Hamill, Kenneth Branagh, Uma Thurman. Yeah, those guys. What did it remind you of, Brian? Sorry.
Oh, well, there was this claymation Jesus movie called The Miracle Maker that came out in late 90s, early 2000s, and you kind of, if you watch it, you kind of forget pretty soon that you're even watching claymation. It's really well done. Anyway, it kind of reminds me of that. But so if you're cheap and don't want to go to the theater and you want a similar experience, just watch The Miracle Maker. And I say this having not seen King of Kings.
Well, it's
So
because it's not out yet.
yeah.
No one's seen it unless you're like on some kind of screener.
So
If I
you
think
know,
if I had small children, I
take
think
it
I
with
would
a
take
grain
them.
of salt.
I would
Yeah, I
take.
don't know. I mean, a PG animated, like I don't know.
Right.
I've got a lot of recovering to do. I had a really hectic week this last weekend's been super busy, so I'm just trying to get back to regular operating procedures. Had
Mm.
Austin turned 21 on Saturday, and my dad was in town. He flew in to be here for Austin's birthday and also to come see Susie. So had him in town, and lots of stuff, dinners, people over, staying up late, all that kind of stuff. So
All the things.
all the things. It was great. It was it was a
Right.
great weekend, and I'm beat. Um,
It's like one of those, you have to have a vacation from your vacation.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, that's been my last. So my being old has come full circle, right? So my youngest is 21. Like that's great.
Full-fledged adult as your
Yeah.
youngest,
Yeah.
a grandchild.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's wild. And my son, being the hardcore partier that he is, he drank a hard root beer, and me and the boys played Axis and Allies. That was how he spent his 21st birthday.
On like like a dinner table with
Yes.
with a board, like
Yes.
old school.
Dice and little plastic men and the whole bit. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Till 2 in the morning. That was how we did.
Did the
That was
Nazis win?
They did.
They're like the
Uh-oh.
easiest to play
Wait,
with.
no, 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 no. They didn't. No, because Austin and I were the Axis, and we lost.
Damn it.
I had a massive naval battle off the coast of California. That's how far we pushed, and then it was all for naught.
Mm.
Damn it.
Yeah.
The, the production power of the US.
And the UK conducted D-Day on their own because Japan was eating up all of America's attention,
Mm.
and they still managed to pull it off and take Paris, and yeah, it was a bad day. It was terrible.
Mm.
No good, terrible, very
Yeah.
bad day.
I was joking as I took Japan that I
You're
was
like,
going to take.
no.
I was like, I'm going to take all of my forces and consolidate to Iwo and refuse to give it up. It seemed like
Mm.
a good course of action.
Bet the photograph would not be as good.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
What photograph? There'd be no photograph. It would
There-
be an
there might-
unknown island.
I bet there'd be some photographs taken, but just nothing that cool.
True.
Ewo.
Yeah, it's the 80th anniversary of Iwo.
That's so crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did I mention, like, when we were in high school, Vietnam was actually closer to us than kids in high school today was for the invasion of Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
In case you weren't feeling old.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought of it as ancient history.
Vietnam felt like ancient history.
Right. So I'm thinking that kids today think that 9/11 is ancient history.
Mhm.
Like that's
I'm
like I
sure
remember
they
my
do.
mom talking about like, oh, I remember where I was when Kennedy was shot. I was like, with the who remembers that? Like I don't know. With the film, like I don't know what are you talking about? Kennedy.
Yeah, that's
It is
crazy.
pretty wild to think about how like drastically the world has transformed in the past
And
100
how
years.
quickly it has
Mhm.
too.
Yeah. The speed of information and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's super crazy. And you got to think that's part of why Vietnam felt like it was so long ago, because we didn't have footage of it. There was not, drone footage of stuff going on. There wasn't dudes shooting, selfies of incoming and being out on patrol. Can you imagine dude's got a GoPro stick and he's like, oh, out on patrol again.
I'm in the rice paddy.
Then all of a sudden, oh shit, contact. And then, the thing's bouncing around and they're in a gunfight. That would have been wild, but we didn't have any of that. So it was impossible to have like, that feeling of connectedness to it.
But it did have more coverage than previous wars at the
Oh,
time,
for
right?
sure,
Because
because of
with
embedded.
the
Yeah.
yeah, embedded journalists, you got, the protests at home, and
Hmm.
not like Desert Storm was the first time that CNN was like on the scene. They're like in the battle. Like we're
Broadcasting
yeah,
live.
like
Yeah.
Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf became a celebrity.
Yep.
He's just a general. Nobody knows generals.
Right.
We
Yeah.
all know Stormin Norman and Colin Powell, right?
Yeah. 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 That was crazy because it kind of makes you wonder if like what if there had been live streaming footage of like, I don't know, the Nicene Convention or something. And, like people would know what was actually happening instead of, the second and third handed, you know,
People would
information.
still make stuff up about it.
Well, would they still be like Catholic? Like would
Good
people still
segue.
hold
Good
to,
segue.
dogmatic things that there's no historical basis for if they couldn't see it actually happening in the olden days? I don't know.
No historical basis or no biblical basis?
Same thing. I mean, eh, so I guess when I say same thing, it's a fair question, but when something is just being done out of tradition, right? You can't go back to the first time it happened. Well, I mean, you could, but it would just be somebody being like, "Hey, let's do this." You're
What's
like,
interesting,
"Why? Why not?" And then you
you
do it
know,
again, and then you start trying to justify why you're doing it.
it's interesting. Like, this is all unscripted, of course. We never really plan these conversations, but it strikes me how, like, my remark about how everything has changed and over the past 100 years,
Hmm.
how like how much that should apply to the church, but it doesn't. Like we're at such a unique point in history where like really nobody over the past 2,000 years had the advantages that we do, where we can ask Chat GPT, hey, when was the first time the Catholic
Hmm.
Church started, doing this ritual or that
Yeah,
ritual, and where does this idea come from? They couldn't, like, I mean, you might have, a local library where you can research this stuff. You can spend an afternoon like seeing if it's in certain books where it might be. You can't just ask the internet and get these answers. And so we're in a much better position to know, just the history of the church and the origin of all of these traditions and rituals than anybody else. And this kind of ties into something else we were talking about a while back. The early church fathers had no idea what a ziggurat was.
right.
Um, so their understanding of, just as an example, the Tower of Babel story, like they didn't,
They wouldn't have called it a ziggurat because they didn't have that word. They didn't have that reference
right.
point. Yeah.
Like they were closer in time and geography to ancient Babylon and their use of ziggurats, but they may as well have been on a different planet in you know, a different millennia for
Yeah.
all they knew about it. But now we're so it like I kind of I'm hopeful that you know if the human race lasts another 100 years, or if this age of history lasts another 100 years, that will Christianity will be so fundamentally transformed by our access to knowledge that we'll we'll come much closer to restoring genuine Christianity. But anyway, that's a
Does
Yeah.
a certain level of arrogance or haughtiness come with that, where we think we're because everyone's in a consensus because of whatever study, but we could be completely off base, but we believe that we're so right. I mean, does that make us any different than the church fathers?
what do you mean by that?
Because we think, I mean that if you have a bunch of information, but the information is wrong, but you think it's right and everyone thinks it's right, therefore
Everybody's
it's
working off the
right.
same sheet of music. Yeah.
You're right. So what are we really restoring it? Is it really restored to where it's supposed to be, or where we believe where it's supposed to be? And I think there's a touch of arrogance with that, and that comes along with less reading and less and I think we go back to trusting the experts, right? Because we do have this thing in our hands. I mean, I've seen kids type in their GPS to like Walmart in the city that they live in, right? And not for traffic purposes to pick a different route
Yep.
for like it's just what they do.
Yes.
Um,
My son
I,
does that. I
right.
I give him a Tim test every once in a while. We'll be going somewhere, and I'm like, "Boom, GPS is down. Your cell phone's dead. How do you get into the store?"
Hey,
And
so-
I do it, and I'm like, "Look around. Tell me where it is. Point in the direction of Walmart." And he's like, "Wait, no." And I'm like,
he's like Floyd on True Romance.
exactly.
So like,
You just wait. No, you go this way. You keep going.
okay, here you go.
But no,
Um,
I think your point, Dre, is interesting because I mean I think about that, right? We everybody does it, first of all, confirmation bias or whatever
sure.
would you want to use, right? And I story, I don't want to get into a long story. The CIO of General Dynamics one time said to me, um, Matt, the first liar wins. And I was like, what? And what he said was when a person pitches a story, an idea, a concept, and you noodle it through and you buy into it, humans become very dogmatic in things that they've been taught. And I think there's some studies around this, but he was just making it conversational, that it's one thing to be told something, but when you're taught it, you tend to have a really hard time letting go of it because you don't want to believe that you were fooled, right? It's one thing if I said, "Hey, Dre, this is called whatever," and then you get made fun of, right? Because you were wrong. Like that's a whatever. But if I'm
Sure.
like, if I give you this big long story about how this pen was invented and all the people that came together and the etymology of the word and this and that, you're going to be like, man, this is freaking cool. You're totally bought in. And then someone's like, that's not true. Then you're going to like punch people.
I think COVID was a perfect example of that.
Absolutely. That's a great example on both sides. Right?
Correct.
Because both
Correct.
sides, the science deniers, the
Sure.
anti-vaxxers, and
Sure.
the COVID heroes, both
Yeah.
sides had very formed opinions about the why or the why not. And because of that, they clashed in a way that we've really never seen in our society since probably the civil rights movement. And I don't think I'm overstating that.
And we did, and the truth is that probably 99% of the people that were so sure knew fuck all about all of it.
Nothing. They
Right?
knew
They were just
nothing.
going like, I did my
They
research,
were they
which
were
is a hilarious
they were
statement for
they were
today.
Sergeant Schultz.
But to Brian's point, I think he's right. So I'm just saying that we have to be cautious as we restore the
For sure.
church.
For sure.
That just because we have information doesn't mean that the information
I
is correct, and we can't just all, coagulate around this
I,
piece of information and believe that it's right.
I had a moment
Well,
today.
it's got to be a discussion. It can't just be everybody siloing off into their camps and picking one scrap of information, but it's got to be a discussion. But
But
and
didn't
we
the
also
church
have
fathers
to.
do that, Brian?
Sure, but they didn't have have access to the information that we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, on the internet, you can ask Chat GTP things, and I couldn't tell you how many times I've asked Chat GPT something, like I remembered a quotation but I couldn't quite place it, so I just asked the question, and then it said something, and then I'm like, well, that's wrong because I know the quote and
Right.
it says this, and then oh,
Yeah.
my apologies, it's actually da 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 da,
Yeah.
and
That actually has a name, by the way, in the IT world. They call that a hallucination.
yeah.
I think it's sentient and he's a liar. And he's like, ah, shit, you caught me. My bad.
Well, I think it calls the most available results from the internet. Like we fall into the trap of thinking that we're engaging with an intelligence when it's really just it's kind of it's really just
It's a
an
souped up
advanced,
Google search.
Right.
yeah,
You know,
it's an advanced search engine with a language model
Yeah. Yeah.
that
It's
present that
it's the
packages
large
it, but
language model that's what's fooling us, by the
I
way.
was
It's not the AI underneath, it's just the
right.
language model.
I was working on my resume last night, and I asked ChatGPT. I'm like, "Hey, tell me about Andre Bibbs." Yo, Andre
Uh-oh.
Bibbs is a military veteran who retired after 24 years of service, and he's got kids. He also goes by the moniker Super Dre on all of his social media, and he's very much into military fitness and his family. For example, he talks about March being the beginning of Bibbs season, and
That's
it was
crazy.
basically just reading my social media,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And spit out a whole essay about who Andre Bibbs
Hmm.
is. And I was like,
Chat GPT
yo,
wrote an oppo piece on you.
it,
That
this motherfucker always
right.
like, he's also conservative and black. Call him racist names. Anti-vaxxer. but but yeah, that's so I mean we that's a good point with the actual information. But I think Brian, do we have to do more deprogramming today than the church fathers did? Of course, people had their beliefs and it was deeply entrenched from like millennia, but you only had to deprogram one thing, right? That's what they believed or wherever they were from. You knew culturally this is what you were dealing with. But here we have so many disparate views and so many entrenched thoughts. I mean, I've heard it, the reason why people don't come around on the transgender thing, because I mean, if you if you have a child and you let them go through this surgery, what kind of parent are you if you find out that that's wrong, and then
Hmm.
or
Yeah,
if
they
you
can
say that that's wrong,
they can
like you have
never
to double
face
down on that,
reality
otherwise
on that.
you
Yeah.
suck.
Yeah. That goes back
And
to my point about the first
right, it
liar
does.
wins 100%,
Yes,
right?
I'm like,
And
yo,
yeah, and the thing I took from that, and so there was a second part to this conversation. I think it's
uh,
relevant also. He said, so the first liar wins, and then he said it organizationally, the higher up the chain that the story is sold, the more dogmatic it becomes as an organization. Because it's one thing to be a manager and get, the Microsoft rep tells you this and you buy this software and you're like, all right, this is the best stuff. But if the CIO is the one that gets sold the bill of goods, like the company is 100% all the way invested in this story now. And he goes, and it might not necessarily be the best interest of the company, like we're talking organizationally.
sure.
But, it's just that's the way it is. It's dogmatic. You're
Is
not
that
getting around it.
a Pope analogy?
Well, I think it's church leader analogy. I think
Sure.
it's a family leader because you also got to think about
My
in
family's not doing that.
it back in the A&E, right? The ancient Near East, there was no separation between the governmental leaders and the church leaders, right? They were largely one and the same. Like your rabbis ran the town of the Jewish culture and whatnot.
They had the moral authority
Now I
and
Well,
I recognize that we're kind of straddling two areas because it was very Hellenistic and whatnot where the church leaders were. So give me a second, Brian. But I still think that Jewish influence was relevant because the way that they made decisions, like the way the Talmud is done, right, is just a bunch of old dudes opining their opinion, right? And let's be real, the Didache is not much different, right? The Didache is the Talmud for Christianity, in a manner of speaking. It's just a bunch of dudes having an opinion about how to do things. Whether it's inspired or not, we don't know. But it's
well,
just a bunch of
I think
dudes
we
having
can safely
opinions.
say it's not inspired, but
Why?
because it refers to apostles in the third person, like it's very like the internal evidence is that it was not written by an apostle. It wasn't written
So
by
so we've
a
we've had this conversation before. So you're saying only the apostles have ever been inspired in the history of Christendom? I didn't
the
say it was canon. I didn't say it was biblical canon. I just said was it inspired?
well, I mean, if I guess that depends on what you mean by inspired. But
Influenced by the Holy Spirit. I mean, we just did it. We just did an episode on that,
well,
right?
and in by that definition, I mean, you could say that about any genuine Christian.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
but it,
To me, and that's a fair point. Maybe we need to, create some definitions on the show so we can always be talking from the same sheet of music. But when I say inspired, I mean simply that the person that's saying, doing whatever is a Christian and has the Holy Spirit affecting doing in some way, helping this person do this thing to further the kingdom of God. I think musicians can be inspired. I think poets could be inspired. There could be a lot of things that are inspired. That doesn't mean it needs to be canonical or it needs to be, religious law. My hope,
You're talking about inspired by God, not inspired
yes,
inspired by Matt Moore.
or inspired by the songs of Prince. I don't mean that. I don't mean
Yeah.
that's not what I mean. I mean inspired by God, by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, the English word that's translated from the Bible as inspired is theopneustos, which is God breathed.
Yeah. Which is not to say prophetic, right? Like I'm not. That's a different level of inspiration.
The Bible only really uses that term for Scripture, and if we're not talking about canonical Scripture, I'm not sure what use the term has.
I think it's for me, the use is going back to the gifts of the Holy Spirit. If something is the fruit of the gift of the Holy Spirit, to me, that's inspired. But it's not validatable, right? Like if, one day I wake up and I'm like, man, there's just this thing on my heart and I can't get it out of my head.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do this. It could very well be the Spirit, right? That doesn't mean that, I'm now a prophet or a living apostle or anything like that. It just means the Spirit's moving in me and I'm going to go do this thing. That's a little bit of a rabbit hole. I didn't mean to take us down there, but my only point was that what I was trying to say was that the Didache specifically, and I bring it up because it has a lot of, to my understanding, a lot of effect on Catholicism. That it was, ostensibly inspired. Yeah, I mean, it was the Church Fathers that created kind of what we know today as Catholicism. It wrote the Didache.
What you find in the
Didache,
what you find in the Didache is actually like starkly different from Catholicism.
I'm setting up a long-term point. Yeah, I agree with you.
But I think we had to start from ground zero here. We're doing a show on Catholicism. What do we want to cover here? What is our interest in?
I think we've had a handful of questions about, we've talked about, Mormonism and some other things. I think we touched on Judaism briefly, but it was really, what's the big differences between Protestantism and Catholicism, and why is Protestantism correct and Catholicism incorrect? I'm kidding. That wasn't the question. That's where I would land because I don't think it is, but that's
wait. You don't think it being what is
Catholicism is correct?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I don't know why that would be.
I think we've known Matt long enough.
I feel like that was like that lead wasn't buried. That was kind of
well. I just asking for.
I don't have a burning hatred for Catholicism like I do for
Calvinism.
Calvinism, yeah. Like,
I do.
I do.
I find myself liking Catholicism when Michael Knowles talks about it.
I agree with you.
Not as much as the other guys, but for some reason when Michael Knowles talks about
he
it,
seems to be an agreeable Catholic.
Yeah. He's like, no, we don't even say anything on that. We're just like, oh, there could be aliens. I don't know.
So I jotted down 5 basic points about why Catholicism is wrong.
Okay,
and,
that's one way to start. That's one way to come at the show.
Can we do it 5 points of why it's different?
Right. That was my only thing is why it's different.
Because a lot of people will just say, Christianity is Christianity, but then a lot of people say that Catholicism is quite different. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't know the difference.
Well, okay, so that's what.
Tell you what.
So how about that? We came at Mormonism by saying, are they really Christian?
Right.
So why don't we come at Catholicism the same way? Can you be a Catholic and be a Christian?
Well, let me complete this thought, and I'm going to let you guys
You be
I'm
the
just,
judge.
I'm just laying out options here
Sure.
for because like I wasn't sure what angle to take here. But we like last week we were talking about the Eucharist or
Hmm.
the Lord's Supper
Hmm.
and why what Catholics do is not only unbiblical, but it's kind of idolatrous and even blasphemous. We didn't get that deep into it that the blasphemy came up, but I would characterize
Brian's
it that
dropping B bombs.
and just for for the listeners' benefit, this is me saying this. I wholly expect Matt and Dre to maybe outright disagree with me or at least not be fully on board with what I'm saying. But just in the interest of kind of framing the discussion and offering a choose your own adventure list of options to Matt and Dre, the five basic points that I came up with for why Catholicism is wrong are as follows. Gnosticism. It's characterized by Gnosticism. It's a authoritarianism. Specifically, it's there's an antichrist aspect to it. It negates the priesthood and sainthood of believers by the way that it frames its own priesthood. The sacraments are treated as magic rituals. They're treated as means of grace in and of themselves, whereas I would argue that they are more acknowledgments of grace already received, and their phony continuity as a claim to legitimacy. Um, so
With
if
that
any of
last part,
those,
that's the one Catholics
That's
might
the
actually
biggest thing
pull
they
out
lean on.
I think the
yeah,
Knights of Templar will come cut you up.
um, the question whenever I encounter like really super hardcore Catholics who are insisting like Catholicism is the only true Christianity, and if you're outside of the Catholic Church, well, that's you're 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 an apostate, or even just insisting that the truest and best version of Christianity is Catholicism. The question I always like to put to them is, should heretics be burned at the stake? And I never cease to be astonished by the range of answers that I get to that.
So what's your rubric on that question?
Well, the Catholic Church burned a lot of
I
people at
know
the
that,
stake.
but my point is so are you in your head thinking that if they say yes, then they're evil, or they don't understand the teachings of Jesus, or
I
are you
wouldn't go so
thinking
far as to say that they are evil. They might be, but like I'm not going to rule it out. But that's not my point. But I think it is. I think that the obvious answer to that is no. Although I do get a lot of yeses to that
sure?
question.
No, I mean I get that. I mean I think a normal person would say no, um, and it would take probably a practicing Catholic or an extreme um, charismatic Protestant to answer yes to that, right? Like those are probably the only two groups of people that would say yes.
But are you
Would
saying
be
that
my thought.
Catholicism should be negated or proven wrong because some humans in history did that in the name of Catholicism?
Well, let's unpackage that. Um, Most people the correct answer to the question is no. But if you're Catholic and you answer no, then this happened under the authority of
Of the
you
Pope.
know of the Pope and the priesthood. um this would like the church. Now they'll say, to kind of steel man, well, any Catholics listening would probably scoff at me calling this a steel man. It'd be
You
great to
think?
it'd be great to have a Catholic on
Let's get
to
Cam and
interact
Bertuzzi on
with.
today.
What's
Call him
that?
up.
Get
Get
Cameron
Cam
on.
on.
But um sorry, I lost my train of thought. The answer is no, you shouldn't burn heretic at the stake. But if a Catholic answers that, well, they have to acknowledge and explain the fact that this happened under the authority of many a pope and local bishop, a local bishop acting on the delegated authority of the pope. Um, So if the answer is no, then how do you square that? Now they would point out that, well, the church didn't burn them at the stake. The church only tried them for heresy and found them guilty. It was the local authorities, it was the state that burned them at the stake. But that's a lot like saying, no, Your Honor, I didn't
That's
murder
like
my
saying the Jews
wife.
didn't kill Jesus, the Romans did.
Um, I wasn't going to go there. I was going to go say more. No, Your Honor, I didn't kill my wife. The hitman I hired did it. Um, they're still doing it at the behest of the church.
I like mine because it's spicier.
Yeah, I'm just steering
No,
clear of
no,
that
Your
because that's
Honor, Trump did not turn those around because they were in international waters.
Oh, the aircraft.
Yeah.
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 He
I
didn't have the authority to.
both of those are just different shows. You
Yeah.
know what we're doing. So that's my only reason for the whole,
So let me ask you
hitman thing.
this. Could burning heretics at the stake, could it have had its place?
Um,
Could the church have legitimately changed its mind and come into a new age?
well, the thing is, the church never did change its mind on that.
The Overton
Like
window moved.
the church was stripped of its political power, but by the Protestant Reformation,
Hmm.
and like people like modern Catholics will say, well, that's not fair. That we're not in that time anymore. Except the church as an institution never like renounced the practice of compulsory religion, of burning heretics and
Right.
apostates at the stake. They were just stripped of their ability to do that. So that really nobody today is even Catholic in anything resembling what they were
So that's
500
actually an
years
interesting
ago.
take about the difference between the Pope and say like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. Like any Mormon will tell you, like, hey, they're flawed men. Sure, they're prophets of God, but they did stuff that wasn't right because they were wrong sometimes, and sometimes
Catholics
their
don't say
own
that.
personal desires overrode. I mean, so did King David, right? So
Except they made their personal desires like that, like they justified it by
that's a
supposed
different show. But
revelations.
I mean, I don't.
Well, I think it's the same principle that we're talking about.
Wait,
Um,
hold it. Say it again. They made their principal desires or their.
well, I mean, Joseph Smith claimed to be getting revelations that told him from God that told him he could have, umpteen many wives,
He
and
didn't want them.
he didn't.
It wasn't his desire. God told him. What are you doing? What are we talking about here?
Right,
He
exactly.
told his wife. He's like, "Whoa, it's not me, dude." Anyway,
That's which is
He's
pretty much
like,
like
I have to have all these wives. I don't say it. God says it.
which
He
they
says,
say,
Joseph.
"Sir,
He says, Joseph.
Joseph, you got to have many wives."
No,
Emma,
but
I gotta have them.
I do think, guys, just to kind of bring this back in, I don't know why we're so loose today. I do think that that's a big difference, right? So, Dre, the question you asked, and I started to unpack this the other day in our chat with Sean, and he was asking about, um, killing in the name of God. That came up in a different
Mm.
conversation, different show, right? But what I started to say, and time got away from me, was, if you're doing something in the name of God, you should be able to inspect the thing that was done and see if it aligns with the teachings of that religion, right? So I think what Brian's saying, but he didn't say it overtly, is if you were to take the idea, the concept of heretic burning, right?
Right.
We'll give it a name, and then hold up the Bible in its totality, not the Old Testament. And does this align to what Christ was teaching us to do under the new covenant with God? Then you have to sit down and say yes or no, right? To answer Brian's question, because I think when you're asking this random question, you're being a man on the streets, you're doing your thing, you're walking around drinking and talking
So you
about
say you're
God in
Catholic, huh?
Tulsa. Exactly. And he's like, how do you feel about burning heretics? Right? Like that question is going to strike the average person as saying, do I agree with the Catholic Church historically and totally? Am I a good Catholic? And then I have to throw some morals and some rationale into it. But, to me, the way to look at it is to say, when did this occur? Oh, in the 1600s, 1400s, whenever the hell it was, 1200s. We were clearly well into the new covenant. And does that type of punishment and behavior align to what we should be doing as Christians? And then the answer is simply yes or no. It's a binary answer. It can't be like, well, it depends, right? And so once you unpackage that, then you say, well, if it's not, but the person doing it is professing to have papal right and papal insulation from being judged because simply because he can claim some false lineage back to Peter, you have to start questioning the infallibility of this person, and then by default,
Yeah.
the religion
And then
atop
why
which he
Peter?
stands.
When their entire claim to legitimacy is this supposed unbroken continuity from today's Pope Francis all the way back to the Apostle Peter, you don't get to hide behind, oh, well, that was just a different time and they
Right.
had different things.
Exactly.
So basically, Peter's burning people at the stake, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but when you read the New Testament, you know the main difference between the new covenant and the old covenant, the covenant of Moses, it's a covenant of law. Like the law of Moses was the law of the land. You obey it because if you don't, you get stoned to death. It's not like whether or not you believe in it is incidental. You
And we
do
do
it.
that today, right? Like
Yeah, that's how any
ignorance
government
of the
works.
law is not an
Right.
excuse,
A-
right? I didn't
Any
know I couldn't
government,
kill my neighbor.
yeah,
Why do I have the death penalty? Because I thought it out perfectly.
any
Like I don't
government and law
right.
operates on the principle of coercion by threat of violence. The new covenant, though, it's salvation by grace through faith, not by the works of the law. You obey God because you love and trust him, because you believe that it's right. It's doing so is its own reward because you love and trust the one who commanded it.
Right.
And so if you have an institution that claims to, the head of which claims to be the vicar of Christ, which literally means substitute Messiah, which is the definition of an antichrist, as an aside, but he's obeying him is compulsory because you get burned at the stake if you don't. Well, that's not Christianity. That's that is
I
that's
agree.
that's an affront to Christianity.
Bars.
Yeah. Wow.
Rack him.
I mean, didn't Matt Walsh almost canceled the Pope?
Which he couldn't have done 500 years ago. So
Right.
even
But he didn't cancel.
He couldn't have almost canceled him 500 years ago.
He was. It was. I don't remember the choice of words he used, but he's like, it's the Pope, so I can't cancel him, but I'm going to disagree with him on.
And that's crazy because if
Right.
you're a Catholic, you can't disagree with the Pope.
yeah.
He was clearly wrong, though.
But no, he wasn't.
Well, to be
Right.
fair
Right.
to Catholics, if a Catholic were sitting here in the discussion, they would object. Well, the Pope is only considered infallible when he speaks ex cathedra,
Right.
which so
Agreed.
if the Pope
But
isn't
Brian, what does
on-
that mean? That's a big word. What does that mean?
ex cathedra means from the chair, like, or from the throne, meaning like it has to have like an official declaration that he is speaking that he's speaking in his
Right. So if he's
capacity
walking down the
as-
hallway, he could make mistakes. But when he
Right.
sits down and thinks about it and prays about it, and then he rules,
Oh, okay.
that's the word
So
of
if
God.
he's just sitting getting
Which-
interviewed by the New York Times and he's a big fat lib, so no, then it's like,
Right.
oh, that doesn't count. But
but
he's
I
like, hold on, answer me that again. Light some candles. I don't know. What do they do? I don't know what. Ask Mary. I gotta.
and so
You got to sing Maria, Maria.
a Catholic would argue that, well, since the Pope didn't declare burn that heretic ex cathedra, well, it doesn't count because he didn't say Simon Says from his magic
Oh,
chair.
he was just an asshole.
But I think that's kind of a cop out when the institution itself is just operating in a general way.
Well, especially
that's
Could it have been
think about
that someone
this.
just went on their own and just
on.
executed the order?
So maybe once.
Because I think that
Sure.
Kathy asked Colonel Jessup that, and he said no, never.
Yeah. And so yeah, agreed. I get where you're going.
Right.
Once it could happen without him knowing about it, right? But there is no chance that at some point some bishop didn't come in and go, Holy Father, we got to talk. Like they're out there doing these things. They're out there doing this stuff, right? And
Is
they
it
told
good?
him, and he was like, "What?" Or he went, "Yeah, I know. Get out of here. We don't want to talk about this
Well,
anymore." Right?
but
Like
these were happening like so like in like the Protestant wars themselves were so like these were a matter of policy. It
that's
wasn't like a one-off
that's what
that
I'm saying. My point
yeah.
is, you could
Right.
argue that it could have happened once in a vacuum, and he didn't know about it, and he didn't bless it. But at some point, you can't tell me that the sitting pope didn't know about the Spanish Inquisition. Like, like
Yeah.
that's impossible.
Damn
A-
Dominicans.
and
Not that cool island in the Caribbean.
and the Pope doesn't get to play the game of plausible deniability,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, if we don't talk the thing and the stuff, forget about that other guy that that owes me the favor for the thing. Like, we're not doing that thing. We're doing the other thing we talked about, Polly. Like, that's not the way that the vicar of Christ gets to operate.
Well, what
And
if the Protestants were so dangerous they really did need to be killed? Otherwise we're in the world we're in now. Maybe they were right way back then. If they would have killed them all, then we wouldn't have the problems we have today.
Then I go back to my earlier point about inspecting their actions and holding it up to the mirror of Christianity. And if all of those things needed to happen, then we've got to have a conversation about free will versus predetermination and predestination.
yeah, and that speaks to another common Catholic objection is that well heresy you know heresy is such a dangerous crime that you can kill someone and they're just dead, but heresy destroys souls and sends people to hell.
What
And
is this
so,
racism?
huh?
It's this racism. Racism is a
He's
thought
saying it's the
crime.
worst thing. It's the worst
It's the
thing you
worst
can
thing.
do is be
Oh,
racist.
gotcha.
Like
Gotcha.
I mean, if you're
But
racist, well, that festers and
so
it seeps in,
And it's
and you
so
can't
systemic.
have free speech. If you have
because
free speech,
And then you gain weight.
right because
but
because of the racism
Yeah.
makes you
yeah,
obese.
Yeah.
That's a callback to
hmm
a chat discussion we were
and then your
having.
house burns down because your fire alarm doesn't work.
Yeah. So
So,
because heresy is so dangerous, they argue then that it has to be stopped with force before, people are dragged down to hell by the heresy. Um, to which I respond, well, I mean, yeah, like actual heresy might be dangerous, but it's also super easy to address by just you explain why it's wrong. Just make an argument. Just correct it with right
are you gonna
doctrine. And
quote Second Peter here,
um
or is it First Peter?
uh
It's just logic.
I'll
Just kill him with facts and logic when it comes to Christ. Doesn't Peter have some kind of
always be prepared to give an answer to everyone asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have.
sure? Yeah.
Is that what you're referring
I
to?
don't know. You say things all. Maybe I should listen more. Maybe I should pay attention.
I don't know where
I,
we are
I
anymore.
just,
What was I
so,
talking about?
so, heresy. You can thwart heresy without burning these fools. Like you
Yeah,
can
you can like have a conversation with them and just kind of explain why it's wrong.
Well,
You don't
that's
have
like
to,
shouldn't you want to
you don't,
convert them back
well,
to
yeah, you
God's
don't,
that's the
kingdom
thing, right?
instead
Just
of sending them to hell?
to simply say, well, that was the point. That was their argument, right? It's like, hey, you're going to die anyway. We want to save your soul, so we're going to put you on this torture rack and we're going to hurt you
And we're
really
gonna make you
bad
say Jesus is
to,
Lord.
to make you verbally,
yeah.
renounce your heresy. That was literally what they were doing. I mean, it's just like that scene in 1923, right?
Oh, where
The priest is trying to convert
Right, yeah.
the little
yeah,
wild child.
if you're not caught up on 1923, then
That was episode 7,
Well,
by the way.
I made it vague
Yeah.
enough. We all know the priest was trying to do good things. Um,
Mm.
he was very Catholic.
He had a good moment.
He was being very Catholic in how he was doing things.
But he was French though. It bugged me.
But
He was so
but
arrogant.
what I was going to say is the idea that a person can be um, saved or that one can renounce heresy under duress is maybe the more frightening point rather than the burning at the stake. Because I mean that goes to the idea of what's going on in a person's heart. And I mean like it's one thing to think you can get a confession out of somebody, just to confess to the crime. But to get a spiritual confession and then to get a spiritual change of heart under extreme duress is insane.
So is it for the newly deceased or is it for the killer? Right. So it's like,
I think it's
hey,
both.
I feel better about it because he, I mean, he confessed. So clearly I helped him go to heaven.
He's not going to burn in eternal damnation. He's dead,
Right.
but he ain't burning. So,
But his disembodied spirit is going to rise and get absorbed into the universe, into the one creator, like the Gnostics say. Isn't that why Brian said Catholics are Gnostic?
well, I think
Is that
that
part
was,
of it?
I
I'm glad
think,
you brought that up.
Because I think we've only been through one point so far.
well, I don't think we're going
Yeah.
to get through all the points.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to do that. I was just giving you guys a
Yeah.
choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
and we
range
went
of
to the burning of the
options.
stake.
yeah, but I mean,
Often.
just to be clear, to make, and to, allow us to be brief if we end up wanting to be brief. We're an hour in right now. Um, for me, the simple answer is the Pope situation. And it's what we just talked about. Like, I think we
Yeah,
combine two maybe in
Yeah.
this
sure.
without getting into the lineage and the divinity of the Pope's line, right? My simple problem with Catholicism is and you guys listeners, I mean, it's shocker that I'm being simple about things, right? Like I did the same thing with all of the copious angles of apologetics, right? I'm like, sure, whatever, I just like this one and I'm done with the rest of it, right? I just need one that I can anchor on and then I'm good, we can move on. And I'm the same way here. We could spend forever going line by line, case by case, and go, and they do this and that's apostate, and they do this and that's heresy. For me, it's just the Pope. You look at the Pope, you look at the bad things popes have done, some of the genuinely bad things the church has done in the name of God, and they did it all under the blessing of this person that supposedly has papal right. It doesn't hold up. And when it doesn't hold up, I'm done with him. I'm done with this guy.
But does
Like
that mean
it's that easy for me.
yeah, but does that mean that the traditions and the things that Brian would call idolatry and even bordering on blasphemy with their traditions, does that mean that they're wrong just because the
I
Pope's not true?
no,
So just
I
because the Pope
Yeah,
isn't
I
true,
would
does that mean
I would
they're
argue that
No.
there's
long
there's even worse things about the Catholic Church than the Pope.
there could be, but to answer your question clinically, Dre, no. Just because the Pope is wrong doesn't mean that everything the Catholic Church does is wrong by derivative.
right? So
But it is
people that I know that are Catholic will say, "Hey, I love Catholicism,"
They
and
like traditions.
thank you. So with the tradition and the knowing of structured life, it's like the Marine Corps of religion. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
well, as I was thinking about this episode, I kept thinking about our conversation about King James onlyists,
Mhm.
uh,
and we kind of went through some of the arguments that KJV onlyists bring up. And
We dislike a lot of Christians, don't we?
well, there's a lot the
haters.
path the broad is the path and wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. Narrow is the road and small is the gate that leads to life if you find it. So if you're on does it necessarily guarantee that we're
Tupac
on the
say that?
narrow
Who said
road?
that?
Somebody, somebody a bit more popular
A bit more
than,
popular than Tupac.
if you can believe it. But if that's true, then doesn't necessarily guarantee that we're right, but it does guarantee that whoever is right is going to have a lot of criticizing to do on lots of different directions.
Yeah.
So that shouldn't disqualify us, the fact that we're so critical of so many different kinds of Christians.
All
But
right. So I cheated. I jumped ahead in the Choose Your Own Adventure book, Brian. What's your number? What's your top of the top five of your top five? What's your big one?
well, I want to add to your point though about
Okay.
the tradition though. Like when we talked about the KJV only stuff, um, and we can link the episode in the description so people can see that if they haven't. But we kind of went through their arguments, and none of them were really very good arguments. They were all kind of ad hoc, just to kind of justify that. Well, we just like King James only. We just like King James and don't like anything else because it sounds churchier. It sounds holier
Yea,
because it's in
verily.
this. It's in this this kind of arcane
That's why I
English
hate it.
that Yeah, but
If it was actually the true core, I would still like, I'm not reading that shit.
but people love their traditions,
Yeah.
and the devotion that belongs only to God, they transfer to those traditions. And I think Catholicism is that, like, to like just 1,000 times over.
Their version of KJV only is their stupid Latin, right? They think their prayers in Latin are more
Yeah,
powerful because it's in the original language, even though it's not.
right. Yeah, and I've heard Catholics like talk about Latin as if it's a holy language,
Hmm.
and they use phrases like it has the sanctification of time,
Hmm.
which, like, if it's been done a really long time, that sanctifies it somehow.
Which is funny because to me it doesn't, because Latin is a dead language. And if it was
Yeah.
such a holy language, we would still be speaking it today. And yet we're not.
Well, no. It's holy because
Romans spoke it.
it's set apart. It's
But you're saying that,
special.
but the sanctification of time stopped, right? Like it's like my argument about the Beatles aren't the best rock band because no one listens to them anymore.
Whoa.
They were really important for a minute,
That's
and
another
no one
podcast.
listens to them.
That's another podcast.
It's the
No
same
one.
thing. No one.
But
I just
when you
listened to
look
them
at the
today.
history of why
Literally, no one.
when you look at the history of why the mass was done in Latin, it was precisely because it was the vernacular, because that's the language people spoke and understood, so they made it understandable. So it
Until it
defeats
wasn't. And then they only did it in Latin to keep the poor people under their control because
That's why
they couldn't speak in real
God's
Latin.
language is English today. Every country speaks English.
which the fact that
America,
that's
New Zion.
I hate you.
You know I'm right.
Okay.
We're in the promised land.
The
Freedom of religion.
So yeah,
Mayflower.
the worst thing about it, the number one point that Matt asked about, it when you kind of step back and just look at the structure of the Catholic Church, you have this professional priesthood, and their job is to administer the sacraments to the lay people. And the sacraments are there as this are they're understood as the means of grace. God's grace gets to the individual believer through the sacraments, which can only be administered by the priest. And it's just like the whole thing is very inwardly focused. Like,
Is
just
Acts a joke to you? Like,
Brian just said inward.
what did I say?
You,
The whole thing was inwardly focused.
Yeah.
What did you think I said?
you said inward. You said the inward.
Okay. I see what you did there.
I like it.
It's
Keep
very
going.
hard. Okay. What was I talking about, Matt?
You were talking about the
Before
fact
The
that
sacraments.
the sacraments are held by the priesthood.
Right. So it's very inwardly focused. It's you have the priest facing the congregation, doing the magic rituals.
Wearing the robes and yeah.
Last week I kind of danced around like the concept of the sacrament. I've thought about it, and I'm going to retract that. The very concept of a sacrament as such, it's not just unbiblical. It's kind of it's anti-gospel. This idea that there's this ritual like baptism, particularly infant baptism, the Lord's Supper, that is the means of the individual obtaining grace. Um, that's 100% false, for one thing. You receive grace by grace through faith. Baptism, partaking of the Lord's Supper, these are memorials to a grace already received. They are not in themselves efficacious for receiving grace.
I like that.
Paul,
That's well thought. I like how you said that. I
Thank
dig
you.
that.
I thought that was standard though.
Well, I mean, if not, if you're a transubstantiationist.
Well, but Protestants have kind of inherited a lot of this stuff from Catholicism, which is why, like, in our chat, I was talking about how it's like all the normal stuff about why Catholicism is wrong. Like, everybody kind of already knows that. My main thing is that
Everybody already knows that.
well, if you're a
Except for
Protestant,
the 2 billion Catholics in the world.
Sure, but they're not listening to this anyway, or they've tuned out. But my main message is to Protestants who, whenever I tell people that, like, you know popular Christianity is collectively functionally apostate, they always, well, how can that be? God promised that the church would never fail. Well, if you're a Protestant, you recognize that the church went apostate for about 1,000 years. That's what the Protestant Reformation was.
Mhm.
But a lot of the stuff that defined that apostasy, the Protestant Reformation kind of addressed all of these little piecemeal individual doctrines that Martin Luther and Calvin and other reformers kind of homed in on, but they still inherited the overall package. And that overall package is characterized by this sort of inward facing, priesthood layperson relationship, whereas you're kind of dependent upon the priest to give you the means of grace, and you have to kind of keep kind of submitting to the priesthood to do the magic rituals that get you into heaven, which is, and everybody knows where we stand on the whole going to heaven thing. That's the Gnosticism I was talking about. That every pagan religion believes in an afterlife as a disembodied spirit. The Bible is the one religion in the world that doesn't have that. It's about physical bodily resurrection and a renewal of this world, not an
And
escape to another world.
no, and to add to that, Brian, even if that wasn't on its own face Gnostic and whatnot, and I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just going to make a point for anybody listening. I would suggest that while that you could argue that isn't, sanctification and the apotheosis that supposedly occurs to saints 100% is, right? Like,
It sounds like a nitpick, but when you say apotheosis, people will pounce on that as heresy. The term is theosis. I know what you meant,
oh, okay, whatever.
but apotheosis means something different. But it's theosis, and yeah, that's actually the point that I'm getting to is you have the negation of that priesthood of believers. But you have this model, this inward priest to layperson focus, whereas the priests administer the sacraments as these magic rituals that by which you obtain grace, and you need this constant kind of supply of that. Genuine Christianity is every believer is a priest. Every believer is indwelt by the Spirit of God and is thereby a saint. Sainthood isn't something that you achieve by
By acts,
right.
because that's essentially how it happens, right? A person becomes sainted because they did enough stuff. They
Yeah,
were
and it
so freaking good at priesting or
and it's
nunning that
right.
they became a
And
deity
it sets up this
or an
paradigm
Elohim.
of yeah, it sets up this paradigm by which, like, you're not expected to be a saint or a priest. You're expected to just be like a
Mhm.
normal kind of grubby, day-to-day believer. It's the priests who are special, not you. The saints who are special, not you.
Are there
What am
are
I?
are
What am
there
I, a
any
saint?
examples? Are there any examples of a non-priest or nun becoming a saint?
Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of them.
Okay.
I mean, but there's still this, but we still think of within Catholicism and kind of bleeding out into the like larger Western culture, we still think of a saint as like a super Christian,
Hmm.
and we think of a priest as like a professional Christian with like special, you know, uh, literally mystical powers that
Yeah.
Christians don't have because they've
Right.
invented this idea of the sacraments. I was baptized by a fellow Marine who was not ordained. Um,
That doesn't count. Better do it again.
my baptism is more legitimate than the so-called baptism done by a priest on a baby in a chapel.
Hot
Um,
take.
That is a
because
hot take.
That
because
might be the hottest of takes.
and it will get people's
Spicy.
hackles up, but it's 1,000% true. And
But it's
fight me if you think
more
it's not.
legitimate. It's
It
not
is
as
more
legitimate. It's
it's more
more
legitimate
legitimate.
because a baby cannot repent of its sins and have faith. A baby didn't choose it. And that's just one way that, like, a Catholic who, grows up, and let's say that you're raised Catholic, and when you become an adult, you discover this zeal for your belief system, well, you were baptized as a baby, so you don't need it anymore. You already went through the magical ritual, but you're missing out on the actual baptism that the New Testament describes. So it's like that and so many other things within Catholicism. They don't, not only are they not faithful and legitimate representations of what you read about in the Bible, they inoculate people against ever experiencing that because they're thinking, well, I already got the water sprinkled on my head when I was a baby.
Why do I need to do anything else?
Right.
I know a guy that is pretty far from Christianity, but believes in I just went blank on the term. So the Catholics have a term where you can buy your way into heaven.
Indulgences.
Indulgences, yeah. Thank you. And he used to say on a regular basis that he didn't need to go to church because his grandma spent so much money that he was covered. And he believes that, man. Like he would say it as a joke,
Like,
but you
yeah,
could
that's-
tell he meant it in a real sense, and it was kind of crazy.
To be fair, I think most modern Catholics would balk at that. They would correct that guy, but
The fact
but
that the theology exists somewhere for him to pick up
Right.
on it.
but
and for it to be logical.
But
Right.
in so doing, that puts them on the hook for, well, why did this institution that is supposedly run by the substitute Messiah, why did it teach that ever to begin with?
Right.
Like, didn't your
Exactly.
infallible Pope know better?
Yeah.
And if he didn't, then why do you subscribe to the institution
Exactly.
now?
We're all roads lead back to Matt. You're back to my reason of Catholicism being wrong. Dre, you haven't said much. What do you think about Catholicism?
He's going to be like, I like it. I think it's good.
I mean, I really like the structure. I like the fact that if I got rich, I'm going to heaven. I like no, I mean, I have trouble with Christianity, period. Right. So
fair.
So when you tell me that, a lot of the things that I've been, seeking for so long is basically to kind of prove that wrong with the whole, it goes back to Peter. Because I'm not even sure Peter's like, why Peter? Why not? I don't know. Thomas or Jude or
I mean, I could give you the answer to that, but
I know, but I
hey, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but
sure.
I think we had to lean into this whole Dre not being a Christian thing more. I think you should pick the topic. You should raise the stuff that troubles you most about Christianity, and we should just something to think about.
We should do that.
Okay.
We should do a series.
Yeah.
Dre's path to Christianity.
Dre's
let's do that. Let's do that.
Grinds Dre's gears about Christianity.
We should do that. Actually, I like it.
And we'll debunk all the things, and then at the end of the day, I'll just get baptized right in the Pacific Ocean.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want you to tell me right now that you'll do that.
Well, hey, and Brian, what we'll do is after he gives us all of his, problems he has, and we address them all, then the next time Dre comes out to visit, we'll just put him on a torture rack.
Yeah,
Christ is Lord.
And we may or may not burn him at the stake when we're done. Depends on what he says.
Like Christ Lord, man. Like what? Cool.
Yeah.
I dig Jesus. Jesus was a Negro, so
he had short hair though.
So
yeah.
But no, I think that the whole tradition, I truly think that Catholics hijacked. They did exactly what I think the original church was against, right? And the whole fact that I really believe that the Holy Spirit is in every one of us just gives me no need for a priest. I think there's a professional class of people that can be teachers, and like I believe in pastors, right? There's people that are talented and know the word inside and out and can help and be a mentor. But the fact that I need this guy to
what do they
to
call it?
sanctify me?
An
Like,
intercessor? Is that the right
yeah,
word?
like, what are
Yeah,
you
there
talking about?
and
God is in me. Like, get out, get out, get out.
I
I do want to say that as a believer does need the church, capital C. Um,
Oh, I didn't say that. Yeah, yeah, you.
yeah, I
I
just want to
agree.
make it clear that I'm saying that
Okay,
you
yeah,
like they're and which is ironic coming from me as somebody who hates going to church.
right.
we should make a show
But
about that, by the way.
um,
After
why
we
I
say
hate going to
after
church.
we save Dre's soul, we need to circle back to why Brian hates church.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I gave pushback on Matt's simplicity, but all roads lead back to Matt. Like,
I
come on, Pope.
I mean, come on.
He's
Come
basically the
on.
Pope.
Come
You're
on.
basically the Pope of
No, Dre was
hermeneutics.
saying about my point was the best point of all of them. At the end of the day, like when you're looking at Catholicism, he was saying he's circling back to the Pope reason.
Because I mean, the Bible talks about like you judge a thing by its fruit, right?
That's exactly my point. That is 100% my
Right.
point.
You judge by its fruit. So that's why I don't like Democrats. Like, so, or the or the civil rights movement, right? So if the civil rights movement was so correct and spot on, then why are their hoods run by black
Yeah,
activists?
I don't think
If
that's well.
I think it's exactly so that's my analogy,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
if
and
Martin Luther King was such this demigod on earth, then why does all the things that line from him lead us to heroin and shooting each other in the
yeah.
street?
So to restate, Dre, I want to restate what you're saying because I think you made the white man really uncomfortable. Um, the idea of the civil rights movement wasn't bad. It was the way it was handled and the way all of the follow-on activities and the falling action of what we're left with isn't ideal. It's not the perfect solution that we
Well,
were promised.
No,
I,
that's not what I'm saying.
That's not what you're saying.
I think the civil rights movement was completely 100% made on oh God, this is gonna really tick some people up. Was made on purpose to set us back.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
I
yes. I think that civil
Wow.
rights is a thing that needs to happen, but the movement itself and the leaders that were in the movement were full of shit.
Okay, so
would you
you
would
just
you
wanted to
say
That's recorded, by the way.
You just wanted to overtake Brian's hot take with a hotter take?
With a hotter take.
hmm, I kind
I
of feel
mean,
like my
it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's a hot take nonetheless.
Right.
would you say it was the civil rights movement or the Great Society legislative
Same,
movement?
same. Same, same. The civil rights
Okay.
movement created the Great Society. So
Yeah,
again, when I talk about the fruits,
I mm,
So I guess it's relevant to the show then when you
yeah,
say it that way. It's just
it's
wow.
BS. They manufactured it.
I didn't have that on my bingo
This
card for the show.
the civil rights movement itself was already happening. It didn't need that push. In fact, that push itself excluded blacks.
Mm,
How many black businesses went out of business
damn.
because of busing? How many black businesses went out of business because we forced integration? Forced integration was actually the crime here. Integration was already happening. It was going to happen naturally. And
yeah,
when we're talking about rights and freedom of speech and freedom of whatever, the fact that you forced somebody at gunpoint to integrate was the wrong thing to do because
yeah.
all it did was create more animosity in the pockets that were kind of on the fence.
I think abolishing Jim Crow laws and and that's where we should have stopped. Like that would have done it.
Sure.
Which Jim Crow laws were themselves
Yes.
like
Agreed.
government
Concur.
imposed
Yeah. Thank
segregation.
you. So that is the government imposed segregation.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
So
The NSA
The
heard
government,
us.
I think the
You
government imposed
froze for a
integration
second.
is
The
just as
the
evil.
NSA interrupted and froze you so
Dre,
that
you cut out for a second.
I think I know. I think that the government imposed integration was just as evil as the government imposed segregation.
Hmm.
Because
So
that's like saying that I have to go. I mean, freedom of association is another thing,
yeah,
right?
I agree.
So what's the difference between, you know, someone with a different value system than me? Is that cultural? So I have to integrate with that culture?
right, right. So bringing it back to this topic, because I think that's cool. By the way, I mean we should do a show on that maybe. I don't know.
The Black Heretic is who I am.
That's a cool handle.
You know, there's
Dude, that's a cool handle. The Black Heretic. Anyway,
would have been in that.
yeah, I mean,
It's got so many levels
I want to
too. Like,
ruminate on that. It's kind of dope. Um,
I see you in like a black robe with a hood.
right? With a cross hanging because it fits. There's like there's a level of irony and whatnot. And let's do this as a separate show, guys. And I mean, I think this is interesting, Brian. The church fathers, right? It depending on who we're calling the church fathers, were some combination of Jew and Catholic, right? I mean, that's just kind of the time frame of.
they were just Orthodox and
I
not.
am gonna have to disagree on both of those
It was a
categories.
question. It was a question.
Right.
Here's what I'm trying to get at. We should sit down and talk through because at some point the church fathers were right, and then
Yeah.
at some point they became apostate, and we should devote some time to talk about where that off ramp was.
That's
I think even when they
gosh.
were right, some of them said some pretty silly stuff.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We
I-
should because this show's already a show, right? Like we can't
Right, yeah.
do that now, and we would need to do some research. And I
Yeah, for
actually
sure.
need to do show prep for once because this feels more like a history class than a
Oh.
than a conversation.
that would be a really good deep dive
Yeah,
into.
I think we should
and
do
I-
a deep
I've
dive
kind
on
of
this.
I've kind of alluded to the gist of it, like last week when I mentioned the Epistle of Barnabas.
Hmm.
But yeah, I would say they were neither Jew nor Catholic.
Okay.
Like
Let's
Sure.
get into that because I don't want to flesh too much of that out now. I get your point. Like I was just throwing that out there as a conversation starter. But like just, full disclosure to our listeners, Brian made a comment in our show chat that he was like, this episode's going to be the consummation of the Reformation. And I was like, there is no chance we're going to pull that off in a show. But maybe if we do a deep dive,
Well,
we can
I
get a
just-
little closer.
I really just wanted to make the point, like, and maybe if this is interesting to people, they'll,
Yeah.
leave a comment or write
Yeah,
us or whatever.
absolutely.
But it's my, like, I didn't want to spend the show just rehashing all the stuff that everybody already agrees with about why Catholicism bad, Protestantism good.
No, I
My-
like your 5 points. You're good.
Yeah, my premise is that the Protestant Reformation just didn't go far enough. Like we inherit like most of the main problems of Catholicism, we kind of inherited that, and it continues today, and we still haven't. I think the Protestant Reformation needs to be completed, and then will have, in order to restore genuine Christianity. But all of the usual objections people raise to, my contention that popular Christianity is collectively functionally apostate. There's this notion that, well, God has promised that the church would never fail. No, he didn't. People quote when Jesus said, he told Peter, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it." Well, gates are defensive weapons. Like he's taught, the pictures of the church as a sieging army, and hell is a fortress that it's trying to conquer. The whole picture presupposes that we are on the advance. Christianity is notably passive, but he also, in the book of Revelation, he warned several churches about losing their lampstands if they don't shape up. That's us. We're in a lot of danger of losing our lampstands. But people fall back on this imagined promise by God. It's true that the universal capital C church will always exist somewhere in the world. Whether it exists on this continent over the next 1,000 years, well, that's in question. And there's no reason that it needs to be extinguished if we would rise up and be faithful.
Yeah.
But this idea that the church absolutely cannot fall into apostasy, if you're a Protestant, well, you don't have any business thinking that, because you've already acknowledged that the church did fall into apostasy for 1,000 years.
Otherwise, the schism wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
I see a stat all the time talks about because Americans are losing their Christian
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Africans are becoming
Well,
Christian all the time.
I was gonna
Asians are
make
becoming Christian all the time.
the joke that the place where it's still true Christianity is in Ethiopia.
Hmm.
The oldest
Except
spot.
they subscribe to the Sethite interpretation, ironically.
But yet they've got Enoch and Jubilee in there. They have the true canon.
Yeah. Matt's sort of tongue in cheek, trying to poke and sort of poking his stick at me.
It's just my thing. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Anybody that's been listening knows what I'm talking about. Well, guys, I think let's wrap this up. This was pretty good.
Let's
But
do it.
I don't think we solved Catholicism, though.
Well, we're not
I don't
gonna.
think
We're gonna come back.
Catholicism's gonna be solved.
It's gonna
There's 2
be.
billion people.
I want to solve it. I want to solve it for John.
Oh, well, sorry, John. You have to tune in again. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Sorry, John. I know you like it when we solve stuff.
Right. And, and first of all, commies wrote I Have a Dream. So it's,
The takes just keep on getting spicy.
Yeah. They
Who
did.
is that guy who was doing the podcast rounds who was dishing on MLK?
Oh, what's his name? Yeah. Black dude going crazy. There's a few out there.
That self-loather.
I'm glad you specified that he's black because
Yeah, he's black dude.
yeah.
He's a Christian and he carries a 38. But go ahead, Matt.
Oh, I was gonna say, so it's come to my attention that many of our longtime fans, our listeners, our watchers, might not fully understand the way that social media algorithms work. So when Dre makes the comments about, like and subscribe in the opening to the show, we actually mean that. And so like when you watch us, and like let's say you're one of the 50, 60 people that are watching us on YouTube on a regular basis, like push the damn like button. If you don't like us, then stop watching. But when you push the like button, it actually helps our show because it adjusts the algorithm so people like you and your other online friends might get recommended our show.
And it would be awesome if we could quit our jobs and just do this.
Words can't describe that. That's the dream. That's actually the dream that all 3 of us have on a regular basis.
And I might even do more homework about it. Come prepared.
So seriously, push the little finger buttons that are down there. And there's like a bell button up in the top if you're on YouTube. Push it, and then it'll tell you when the show drops. And then subscribe, and the button's down over here. And push that button. All of these things help us. So like if you've watched us from the beginning, go back and open every single episode and push the like button. Like I'm being serious. Like it sounds ridiculous, but I go and I look, I can see all
Mom,
of our,
I know you have time, so just go ahead and do that.
But if you hate us,
still push the like button.
You can do that, and you can like get more people that hate us to watch.
Tell us in the comments why we're dumb.
Comment and say
you guys are idiots. Like
you self-loathing black
heretic. And I'll respond.
We need to know that you hate us if you do.
But yeah, seriously, push the button. It's
and a comment also like, hey, did everybody move to Rumble? Like, it's a Christianity show, so and we say some spicy things.
Are we on Rumble?
No,
we're not. So
not yet.
Do we need to get on Rumble? Let us know. Do we need a live show on Rumble? Be in the lineup?
I'm pretty sure
right after Steven Crowder.
I expect YouTube will demonetize us if we ever monetize.
Yeah, I think so.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
So anyway, that was my piece. I just need people to push the like button.
Especially after Ram.
Mom. Push the like button.
Linda, listen, Linda.
Linda.
Pretty please. Sugar on top.
That is perfect. Matt doing the listen, Linda.
All right. Last words, Brian, you good?
I just wish we'd solved Catholicism.
Well, I mean, we got time.
It's gonna eat at me.
Well, you know what? Then maybe you'll come up with some better points to solve Catholicism, and we'll still interrupt you, and you'll never get them out. So it's whatever. So with that, I will say, please. Actually, no, I demand it. Stay enlightened Stay curious, and we will see you next week where you'll push the damn like button and the notification bell. That thing, right?
He means please.
God bless.